We had the values to really highlight the types of behaviors of people that we thought would be successful here. And I probably didn't do as great a job as I could have of really just infusing the values throughout the organization. And what I realized over time is that the more clear you are on the values, and so we created both values and then we created norms. Norms are, how do I live the values? Like, what does the behavior look like of someone who's like doing these, at an excellent level? And what we found is that if you actually just do a pretty good job of really helping people to understand your values and then understanding like what good looks like within each of the norms of behavior, you can kind of point to the values to solve a lot of problems.
Welcome to Growth Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow?
Today we look at the journey of leadership. There's many ups and downs. There's many things that we have to learn. I went through many different phases in my own journey of leadership when I was working with my own companies. And as a leadership coach, there's many different cycles in this journey of leadership. I bring to you a very special guest today. He is Jake Dunlap, the CEO of Skaled Consulting. They are a specialty group focused on getting your sales team aligned, getting the processes right. And we talk about his journey of leadership. All this unpacked today. We look at the hiring aspects that he had to learn the hard way. We look at why values are so important and why it didn't start that way for his organization. And how do you get people truly aligned when you've got change abound everywhere? You'll find this episode really interesting. And my hope is that if you are growing your business, you are tuned in because you want to keep evolving and keep pushing harder and growing yourself. If you want to have a conversation about what's really going on inside your organization, inside your own leadership, or maybe it's the emerging leaders across your team, I'd love to have a conversation with you. I've spent the last 10 years dedicated to figure out how to get people to move forward and grow their businesses. We primarily work with the Inc. 5000. That's where I guess probably 90% of our customers are. But I'd love to get to know you, get to know what's going on in your business. All you have to do is go to genehammett.com and schedule your call. And inside that call, we will actually dive into what's going on and really help you see more clearly how to move forward. We'll put together a plan. And inside that plan, you will be able to decide how to move forward. If you want our help, glad to help you. If you would like to do it on your own, great. We do this because we really feel like we want to get to know you before we start talking about what coaching is and leadership development. And if you think this is a good fit, make sure you reach out to us at genehammett.com and schedule your call today. Now, here's the interview with Jake. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Looking forward to it.
We're going to have a great podcast. We're going to talk about your journey in leadership. And I'd love for you to start with, tell us about Skaled Consulting.
Yeah, I started the company. It's almost 10 years ago. I was a former VP of sales and success for multiple years and realized, it's interesting. I never thought I was going to start my own company. A lot of people ask me that question too. It really just came out of the work that I love doing. And I just, I love the building of teams and the different ways to systematize the way that organizations drive revenue. But I realized I wasn't that great internally. I had some rough edges. And so if I wanted to continue to do the work that I wanted, I can go and do this with hundreds or thousands of companies. And so I made the move almost 10 years ago and never looked back.
Well, where do you think people misunderstand sales? You've got a viewpoint across a lot of different companies. What do you wish people knew about sales that they don't seem to know?
There's probably a few key aspects, I would say. One is that the archetype that we have of what a great seller looks like, which is like this charismatic, like, oh, I'm going to make it happen. That's certainly a persona in sales, but sales is much more process driven than people really appreciate or understand it. And the real reason is, you can go to school to learn how to do accounting and GAAP and principles, and you can go to school to learn the 4 Ps of marketing. It doesn't really exist. So people don't really learn the process of sales, or they never learn the process of sales until they get into the real world. And so I think that there's a real misconception. There's a ideal customer journey for every company. And so it's really about mapping to that. And then what's the right sales motion? And 2, it's that, not only is the archetype of this like non-process charismatic person incorrect, it's really that when we think about today's customer is coming to us more informed, more educated than ever. And say great sellers are really great project managers. They're facilitators. They know how to show up as an expert, how to consult. And it's not, again, just this kind of hand wavy, steak dinner and golf and wine. And I think that those are really the two trends, I think, as we see the salesperson of tomorrow, they're going to be even more impactful.
I'm glad you unpacked that for us, because it's something I think a lot of people are, curious about as sales is evolving. And it is evolving, whether people believe it isn't or not, because of many different reasons. And that, Jake, we're going to not talk about sales as much as we're going to talk about, what does it take to grow your company? You had mentioned you had grown to be on the Inc. list 3 out of the last 4 years. COVID was a tough year for you guys, but you bounced back. What do you think of the driving force of why your team is able to continue to grow your company?
Well, hopefully most people, when they hear about growing the company, revenue or sales is a part of it. For us, I think there's a few factors. I think COVID forced us to really think about our identity and who we wanted to be known as. And I think sometimes, when things are going well, you can afford to be a little bit more loose. You can afford to be a little bit more loose in your messaging. You can afford to generate most of your leads through word of mouth or referrals. But as times get tough, you have to find tighter ways to explain who you are, what you do, tighter ways to fulfill that. We're a people business, and really make the message of why you'd want to do business with us much clearer or cleaner to the market. And so I think COVID really forced us both from an external go-to-market and from an internal process optimization, and really who we wanted to be, what are the projects we wanted to do, we didn't want to do. It really forced us to tighten it. And I consistently have found throughout the nearly 10 years that every time we tighten our focus, the business grows. And I think COVID forced us to really look at ourselves and both, who we were messaging ourselves as, and how we were then, working with people internally, and what was the right fit for us that would allow us to grow in an easier, more replicable format.
I've seen this with my own business as a coach. My business is before that, because we're still entrepreneur. The more you focus, the better. But you're explaining it another time about how important it is to focus on the right customers. Here's what I want to ask you, Jake, because I get that you probably have a hungry sales team out there that's eager to bring on board as many customers as they can. They're probably competitive. They probably want to bring on the right customers, but they look at it as every customer is the right customer. So how do you lead through those challenges?
I think it's being about I'll go back to what I said before. It's very deliberate in who's the right fit and not, and why. I think a lot of times what happens with sales organizations is we don't tell them that we're like, this is right, this is the best fit, as opposed to like, look, let's look historically at what's worked and what hasn't. I mean, let's look at this customer cohort and type versus this one. And usually when salespeople can see and understand the why in the data, they're pretty good with it. So our team knows now, again, it's a services business. It's not just, we sell a product, here you go, good luck. It's we then have to service, and work through a project and manage the project and manage expectations. And I think, what happens is as you really focus in on what's the right fit, the team understands it because they understood the why. And then as they start to see more of those right fit people working with those clients and not the not right fit, type of customer, they start to buy in and generate, the business that leans that way more themselves. So it's really that help people understand the why with data whenever possible. Don't just say, hey, this is what I think is the right move. And then usually people will gravitate toward, the direction that you want to head.
I want to unpack the why, because I think it's a very interesting aspect. Data is part of it. There's probably other elements that you're looking into this.
Absolutely.
What other elements do you look at when you're crafting a story about why we're going to focus on the right customer?
Data is a big part of it. I'm a big fan of whether it's first party data or third party data. Look, here's industry trends. This is what Gartner's saying the market's going. This is Forrester. This is LinkedIn. This is whomever. This is where they see the market. And this is why we're anchoring toward that new, North Star, or like a more concise North Star. I think also it's making them a part of the process. We do a lot of workshops. Anytime we have a change management initiative internally, my operations team, I consistently tell them, it's like, don't worry about the content. Worry about telling the why story for change first, getting consensus. Maybe they need to be a part of actually building the deck or building who the focus. Hey, like in your last year, who were the best fit customers? What did they look like? Oh, well, they were this and this. And then what happens is the more that you bring people along for the journey, change management becomes so much easier on the back end. And so to me, that's a big reason why you have to go through the why exercises. I know for a fact, if people can feel like they're part of the journey, they feel like they understand the why, and like then they can get to the other side much faster than having to to, kind of see it to believe it.
Now, Jake just said something really interesting. If you make them a part of the process, that they have a sense of ownership around what they're doing. That's a principle that we have looked and identified called inclusion. And I'm naming it out here because I want you to be sure of how to use this and why it works so well. Inclusion is including others into the process, the discussions of this, and even the decisions of how to move forward. Because if you make it from the ivory tower, if you will, I know your company's not that big, so you probably don't have the ivory tower, but you get the idea. It may work, but you don't have as much buy-in. If they're included in the process, they understand the reasoning behind it and the whys and what else was considered, and they feel like they're included, then this inclusion increases a sense of ownership. And that will help you in the long run because people will be able to take the decisions and move forward in a very different way than if it was handed to them. So just wanted to point that out for you. Back to Jake. I was also on your website doing a little prep work, making sure that today's interview was really spot on. And I noticed how important values are to you as a leader and to the company. Why would you say they are important?
It's a great call out. Look, I could sit here and give the typical CEO answer. I would say early on in our history of Skaled, we had the values to really highlight the types of behaviors of people that we thought would be successful here. And I probably didn't do as great a job as I could of really just infusing the values throughout the organization. And what I realized over time is that the more clear you are on the values, and so we created both values and then we created norms. Norms are, how do I live the values? Like, what does the behavior look like of someone who's like doing these, at an excellent level? And what we found is that if you actually just do a pretty good job of really helping people to understand your values, and then understanding like what good looks like within each of the norms of behavior, you can kind of point to the values to solve a lot of problems. And we found that, over time, as we continue to do that, and, in our all hands, I have one slide. Every slide, I highlight someone for the week on a value that they demonstrated. I talk a lot about here's the behaviors that it looks like, et cetera. What happens is when people are acting independently, when they're facing a challenge or sitting at their desk at home alone, they're like, man, what's the right thing to do? Well, one of our values is work smart. And work smart means that you don't sit there in a silo. You don't do what you don't just do the status quo. You try something different. So I'm sitting at my desk. I'm like, this does not seem like the simplest way to do this. Let me try this other way to do it. And so, really strong values. And again, I didn't realize this when I first started the company, can actually help to be a guide for people when no one else is around to handle things without needing to get a ton of other people involved, which I think is how most people prefer to work.
We've had a lot of that discussion here in the podcast. So if you had found us before, you would have known it before. Just joking, Jake.
Yes.
The shout out that you talk, and I don't know if you've named it that, but that's one of the ways I frame inside of a meeting, discuss someone who is exemplified that value. What are the benefits of that? Like, I know there's a top level benefit of if there's someone in the room, but I bet you could probably count a few other benefits as well.
Well, it helps to get continued clarity around the value, because again, like I'll give you a good example. One of our values is collaboration. Okay. Collaboration. I could probably go on the street and ask 10 different people, what does collaboration mean? And they'd be like, well, they work well with others, or they do this, but that's not what it means at Skaled. And what collaboration means is that you are someone who proactively communicates. We don't let balls drop. It means that if you're working on a project, everyone, there might be one single owner, but everyone is collaborating for the best outcome, and everyone is therefore responsible for that outcome. So by highlighting these specific use cases, you start to help people to understand and really bring that value to life. Because whether it's a mission statement, vision statement, values, in most companies, like, it's kind of lip service. And it's because there's not a clear definition of what the value means. Yeah, there's like 2 or 3 sentences, but people don't know how to show up and live the values. And so for us, we feel like that, and different department heads will do the same thing throughout our all hands. We feel that it really helps people to understand how to live the values versus maybe a general interpretation of what a word or 3 to 4 sentences might be.
Great example there. Jake, we've been talking about your journey of leadership. You've talked about some of the things you've learned. Is there anything else you've learned, maybe the hard way, that you could share with us today?
Gene, where do I start? We talked a little bit about focus. Every business is different. We're a self-funded, we're funded by myself and, Bank of America and this novel concept called profits. And I think sometimes you get enticed to either run too fast or not move slow enough or not move fast enough. And it's really difficult early on to know, hey, is this a new market we should go after? And I've made big mistakes about, there's a point in 2019. I was like, I don't think I was wrong, but I didn't have the right team or team set up to execute. I started 2 new business lines. We hired 12 people and it just was a disaster. And not by the fault of the people. It was my fault from trying to launch too much. The organization wasn't ready for it. Too many new heads, etc. So I think for me, when I think about planning change, I really start to think about what can the organization handle today and what are the things that I need to do to prepare us for tomorrow. And so to kind of live that, the thing that I've learned is this concept called the 80-15-5. And this is a moniker I came up with, which is every week am I spending 80% of my time on things that are going to impact the business in the short term, 50% on the midterm, and 5% on the long term. So instead of just launching new things, etc., I'm preparing for things that and thinking in longer horizons than maybe I ever have in the history of the business. So just really stretching it out, not trying to feel like, oh, I'm missing out on something if I don't do it right now. It's like, no, I can plan, I can lay the groundwork, and then we can launch it correctly in 6 months or 12 months or 24 months. But I'm doing the little things to prepare to make that business successful versus just like, let's go do everything now. So I think that's probably a big one is changing my time horizon and not feeling like, I've got to do everything now and launch every new business and every new product today. Like, it will be fine. If we wait 3 months and do it correctly, it will be better. So I think that's another big one for me.
Now, Jake just mentioned his framework for how does he focus his time? 80% on the near term, immediate stuff, 15% on the midterm, and 5% on the future. I agree with all this. And as your company grows, you will spend more time on the future and you will spend less time on the immediate. And I think that, it's a smaller team that they have, around 45 employees. He's going to spend a lot more time on the immediate. But my hope is that you will spend more time on the future. And if you're having struggles with spending time on things outside of the fires that are in front of you and the meetings that you attend, then you've got to step back and go, is this the best use of my time? Am I empowering the people around me? Am I truly focused on looking around the corners? Because if you're not doing it, no one is doing it. Just a reminder, your job as a CEO is to look and create vision. I believe that you should have at least 3 or 4 hours each week to do this work. Maybe that is 5 or 10%, but I want to make sure that you are really spending the time wisely around the future of the organization. It's not just a once a year thing or once a quarter thing. It happens weekly. If you aren't scheduling it, you're probably missing out on an opportunity. Back to Jake. Jake, you've probably learned how to interview well. You've probably learned how to read through all of the people that aren't a good fit. What's your best approach to finding people that are best fit for your company?
Oh man, interviewing is always an interesting one to talk about. Especially, I've interviewed, I don't know, thousands of salespeople in my career, hired probably thousands. And salespeople are good. They're good at the hand wave, and they're like, "Oh, I'm hardworking, etc." I would say what I've become very good at is the interview process that we run today is very metrics driven. We don't allow questions like, what do you think? Would you get a beer with this? Like all these things that I think we over-index on finding people like us and not realizing that doesn't usually lead to like diverse thought or, a truly dynamic organization. So, we've got a very regimented process. We work off of a system. There's a gentleman named Jeff Smart. He wrote a book called Who. His father is also a great author. He wrote a book called Top Grading. And so we've got very specific questions we ask every candidate at the screen. We've got very specific skills questions that we ask that are marked either difficult to change, easy to change, or somewhat easy to change, and then how important it is to that role. So we're looking at skill sets of the individuals, and that's ways that they've demonstrated skills. And then we use a very specific experience interview process, which helps us to take ourselves through their work experience in a way that lets us to really see a trend in the way that this person values success, looks at failure, interacts with their leader. And we found that has led to a much more successful fit as opposed to your typical, you've got a disjointed process, 5 people ask the same person the same question. And then at the end of it, everyone gets in a room and says, what do you think? Which is a surefire way to whoever the most senior person or loudest voice is, for them to get the people they think should be hired, but to kind of throw the rest of the interview out the door. And so I think it's getting structured that's made me much more successful. By no means perfect. Let's be very clear, but
I can appreciate
more successful.
I certainly can appreciate the metrics driven approach. How are you incorporating the values of the company into that process?
Great question. Yeah. So those are weaved in there. So again, like there's certain, whether it's on the skill set side, believe it or not, you can see how someone has, again, like let's say one of the questions, I don't have it in front of me, is, let's walk through a complex project that you were tasked with in the last 6 months. Okay, well, this and this. Then there might be a follow-up question that might test for collaboration. Well, great. So how do you, whenever you're put on a project, how do you establish the project team? How do you establish decision-making in that team? How do you establish a triage if things go south? So you can start to ask like very specific questions, because what you want to do is avoid the hypotheticals. How would you handle this? What do you think? You want to avoid all of that. What I've found is that the more that you ground the interview process and what you have done X, you have demonstrated Y, you're going to really start to understand, has this person been there and done it? Because I think it's really easy to say, oh, I would do it this way. But then, well, okay, well, you haven't actually done it that way in these 2 or 3 examples. So, there's some type of disconnect. So it really helps when you ground it in what your experiences are versus asking people hypothetical situations that they can give you, a relatively cookie cutter answer to.
Thanks for that detail, Jake. I appreciate you being here, sharing your thoughts and your journey of leadership.
Awesome. Well, it's great. I hope everyone out there had a lot of takeaways, and, feel free to reach out to me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. It's just Jake Dunlap. So look forward to connecting with all of you.
Wow, what a great interview. I love talking to people that are on the front lines of their journey of leadership. And that's what we did here today. We talked about some of the things he learned the hard way, whether it be, not focusing on values as much as he does today, or maybe it's not having enough focus in the business, or maybe it's the, not hiring right and putting a little bit more of a process-driven approach around to it. That was a kind of a theme that really shined for me inside this. Is as his company's grown and scaled, he's increased the level of focus and process-driven approach to everything. And it's working 3 out of 4 times in the Inc. list. It's impressive. Hopefully you found this episode as interesting as I did. If there's anything I can do to help you with your emerging leaders, if you want to evolve as a leader, make sure you check out genehammett.com. And when you think of growth and you think of leadership, think of Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.